I'm John Dowson, and you're watching Profiles. Now, this week on our show, we're going to be talking with Mayor Margaret Black, who's the mayor of King Township, and her husband, Brian Beattie. We're going to be talking about the history of Newmarket, the York region, and the Black family as it goes back to 18-something or other early in the York region. So welcome to the show, Mayor. Should I tell you Mayor or Margaret?
Margaret's fine, yeah.
And your husband, Brian,
yes.
right?
Yes.
But you don't have the same name. No.
No. Margaret, decided that she should keep her own name. And that was over 30 years ago, and that was rather unique at that time.
Yeah,
it wasn't commonplace then.
Well, it's more commonplace now, but it's still, is unique as well, isn't it? So you're a Black, right?
Yeah.
But we know that you're the mayor of King Township and the chair of the police services board and all that kind of thing. But there was a program on here. Matter of fact, it was on Rogers at one time, and I forget what it was, some panel show about amalgamation or something. And you had to mention something about your grandfather who had been involved in the 1837 rebellion right here in the York region.
That's right.
And I thought, well, that's really interesting, because a couple of times we had done shows in the past about the Main Street, and we talked to some other people about the older buildings down there and how long they were and some history of, and people seem to like that. And so I thought, well, gee, there's not many people in Newmarket or in York region that can trace their heritage back to a rebellion. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of people in Newmarket didn't even know there was one.
Very close there was one, right just west of Newmarket.
That's right. But for those of you, those of the viewers who may not know about this, could you give a little bit of background of the 1837 rebellion that was called the Farmers' Rebellion, I think, and that kind of thing?
Well, in fact, the history of my family, I think, accounts for everything I'm doing today. Living in King, being mayor, and being chair of the police board, I think we could sort of probably predict this about 150 or 60 years ago. You might not have seen it. It would be a female one, quite frankly. But other than that, I think you could predict it. Back in 1837, there was a rebellion in both Lower and Upper Canada, and it was for responsible government. And it was led by Louis Riel out west, I think people know that name, and by Jesse Lloyd from Lloydtown in King Township. He was one of the leaders.
Jesse Lloyd?
Jesse Lloyd. And Jesse Lloyd is my husband's great-great-great-grandfather.
Another connection.
Another
firebrand.
Yeah. And Jesse Lloyd actually escaped the United States, or he would have been hung. There was a price on his head. My great-grandfather, John Black, was one of the lesser rebels. He was simply a 19-year-old farmer living out at the corner of number 9 in Keele. At that time it was the town line and the 4th of King. And he became interested in the rights of the farmers. The farmers were not able to own land. And when they finally did get the chance to own land, it took many, many years to get the deeds. And they were fighting for equality and the equal rights of the farmers. And
there was a similar complication in Quebec at roughly the same time, that the Patriots, as they called them, with the hat and so on, somewhat, I guess, because of the French Revolution, who were fighting similarly, but for the Papineaus, for a different sort of cause, and more like the freedom as they thought at the time.
Well, amazingly enough, it was going on in Quebec and Manitoba and Ontario all at once. And as I mentioned before, this same great-grandfather was born in Quebec City in 1818 and arrived in King Township at the age of 4 in 1822. Among his letters that I have been able to find around the turn of the century, 1900, he often returned to Quebec.
He did?
Yes, and there were letters back. Actually, he died in 1896. So before that, there are letters.
Your great-grandfather died in 1896?
Yes. But there are letters earlier in the 1800s, 1888, in that area, where he was coming back from Quebec City, and he would be writing back to his wife about his journey along the St. Lawrence River. So I don't know why. In the letters, they don't say why he is going there, but certainly the tie to Quebec was still there into the late 1800s.
And it's Brian Beattie, but your connection with the history of York region was also the rebellion
Yes,
And
very
it was in Lloydtown. Now there's a place, or Lloyd rather, there's a little town outside of Schaumburg called Lloydtown.
That's right. And Jesse Lloyd, as Margaret said, my great-great-great-grandfather, he moved to Lloydtown. They originally settled near Newmarket, and then they moved further west, and they built a mill in Glenville, and then they moved to Schaumburg and built a mill, and then they moved another 3 or 4 miles west and finally built their last mill. It was a grist mill in this little community called Lloydtown. And of course,
Did they create this community?
Yes, they created it. Jesse built the mill, and it was subsequently called Lloydtown. And then after several years of success with the mill, he built a homestead, cleared the land, and built a house, and that house still is standing today. There are people that live in Jesse Lloyd's original house.
In the home,
In
right?
the very same home. And it was an absolutely unique home. It was not a traditional pioneer home as we see them today. It was almost like a split-level house.
Really?
Very large house, 2 levels, 2 full floors, and very large. And because Jesse had a large family, and
Was it a log?
no, brick, red brick,
A brick home.
made from bricks from the land.
None of
from the
this
clay.
log cabin
No,
out of the wilderness.
not the
for
pioneer,
him, right?
not the pioneer log home. No.
And that home is still there?
And it's still there.
How many rooms were there?
I believe there would probably be 10 or 12
Really?
rooms.
And the farm is still there too, I guess. or
Yes,
majority
the
of it
barns are not original. They've been rebuilt since then.
So what was his connection to this? I understand he was older. He was in
Yes,
his 50s.
he would have been in his 50s in 1837 when the rebellion took place. And the real leader of the rebellion was William Lyon Mackenzie. And he was known as the Firebrand.
Right.
He was the first mayor of Toronto, and he was at odds with the government of the day, and he formed the Reform movement. And he, in the early 1837, early part of that year, he went out to the countryside, outside of Toronto, and sort of selected 4 what he called lieutenants, 4 leaders in the community leaders. Jesse Lloyd was one of them. A gentleman by the name of Lount from Holland Landing was one, and there were 2 others. And they would have meetings in the community. And Newmarket was one of the first meetings they had to stir up the emotions of the community and explain why they were dissatisfied. And they spent the whole summer of 1837 with these community meetings. And they just toured the countryside.
Now, from what I understand, this had been simmering for some time. Since I think the division 1832 with the Durham Report and so on, but that was the creation of Upper and Lower Canada. But at the point, I think at that time, it was, hadn't Mackenzie been elected several times with a Reform Party was majority, and then they dissolved it,
Yes.
and then had another election, and they got the majority again, and then dissolved it again, and so I guess out of frustration, is that the way it went?
Yes, but what I think is amazing about all of this is the communication systems. Today we have the internet and we think we communicate very well. These people connected extremely well between Toronto and Quebec City and Louis-Riel out west, and then all in these little towns. And how they did it was by horseback, and they were able to communicate what was going on in the rebellion. And Samuel Lount he did hang for his role in the rebellion. His wife went down and pleaded before the governor, and he was still was sentenced to death, and that was it.
Well, there's always intrigued me is why would someone march on Toronto in December? The rebellion, is this, we had to wait till the harvest was in and everything was done so he could say, okay, now we can go to fight?
Well, Brian knows about that.
Well, there's an interesting reason for that, William Lyon Mackenzie was in communication with Papineau in Quebec, and they were trying to mount their activities and marching on the government at about the same time.
Oh, I see.
Jesse Lloyd was selected as the what do you call it? The emissary, the person that would travel to Montreal to pick up the messages from Papineau. So if you can imagine, he would ride by horseback from Lloydtown to Montreal.
Really?
To get the messages.
Get the messages.
And bring them back. So this was happening, it would be about October of 1837. And the message came back through Jesse, and it was discussed with their group, the leaders, and they decided that they would mount this march sort of at the end of November. And it was all connected with what was happening in Quebec. And then they chose a date, a precise date, and that was known about maybe 2 weeks before the actual march. So that gave Jesse and his colleagues, his other leaders, time to get the farmers ready. Of course, they had been practicing all fall in 1837 in the Newmarket area for this big march. I mean, the farmers were learning how to, you know.
Was it really a rebellion had they intended to actually arm themselves, or
Yes.
was it just sort of a protest?
Well, it was a protest, but they were armed with pitchforks, you know, basically, and a little bit of rifle power. And they would there's an interesting story of an incident where a young child overheard his father speaking about rifle practice out on the farm. We're pretty sure it was probably the Black Farm. And the people from Newmarket would ride out to the Black Farm, and they'd butter loaves of bread and stick them on a pitchfork and take them out to the farm, and that was their target practice. And they'd be aiming at these buttered loaves of bread. That was the target practice.
On your ancestors' farm.
Well, we figured out that Brian's great-great-great-grandfather, Jesse Lloyd, when he was walking from, I think, Richard Stouffville over to Lloydtown to set up the mill, after he set up the mill in Glenville, he picked up my great-grandfather, among others, and got them into crime.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come right back with Margaret Black and Brian Bees. Don't go away. So that's that.
Did you know that Margaret Black, the mayor of King Township's great-grandfather, was jailed as a rebel for fighting in the 1837 rebellion? Now you know it.
Okay, we're back, and I was just talking that here's the Lloyds in 1837 practicing on your ancestors' farm, and 100 and some odd years later, you're married, right?
What's amazing is that nobody married during that 150 years. Can't quite figure that out.
But no, you were saying that where was the Lloyd farm?
The Lloyd farm was in Lloydtown, and there are a number of Lloyds in Lloydtown, but there was another Lloyd family that settled in Glenville, which is just a little bit west of Newmarket.
So for our viewers, where is Lloydtown?
Lloydtown is about 1 mile west of Schaumburg. And on
Highway 27?
Just a little west of 27. 1 mile west of 27 Highway.
And is it still there?
Still there.
It's the 10th concession of King, and we live very close. Amazingly enough, we live about the 12th, on the 12th, near the 12th concession of King, so we live very close.
So where was the Black family
on
farm?
the 4th.
Which is where now?
Well, Keelan number 9.
Keelan number 9.
Yeah.
And that farm's still there?
It's still there, and the house, the original farmhouse built by my great-grandfather in 1856 is still there. In fact, it's owned by the owner of Cardinal Golf Course now. It adjoins the Cardinal Golf Course.
Oh, does it?
So when I get to play golf on the golf course, I see the farm where I grew up, and you know, where I used to go get the cows every night. I mean, it really is very, very fond memories.
You grew up at the farm then, right?
And yes, and where I used to fish, and I used to fish on Cardinal Golf Course.
Oh, did you? This is what they call you were a farm girl.
I was definitely a farm girl. The owners, I don't think, knew we were back there fishing, but there were a bunch of the local farm kids. The nice thing about being a girl on a farm, we got to do everything. We got to help with the hay, and I always got the cows every night, and then went fishing on wherever we could find a stream.
I read something some time ago that another well-known person, not quite from that area, but Beaton. What's the name of that? Aitken? You know the...
Kate Aiken.
Kate Aiken.
Well, my mother was born and raised in Beaton. Her father, Reynolds family, had a store there, and they had stores in other places in Ontario as well. And Kate Aiken's was a very good friend of her mother's. And my mother, we always had a Kate Aiken cookbook in our house, and we still do today, as a matter of fact, that we use. So my mother was, her mother was a very good friend of Kate Aiken's.
So your great-grandfather was only 19 then, and here's Lloyd
in his 50s.
In his 50s. Did he actually go in the march to Toronto?
Yes, Jesse would have, we assume that he would have led the march. And the way we sort of have recreated it in our mind is that on the day that was selected to march, they would gather the farmers together, the troops, so to speak, on horseback. probably starting right in Lloydtown. We presume that he marched toward Yonge Street from the west to east, picking up all the farming, the members of the troop, and Margaret's great-great-grandfather would have been one of them. And then they marched straight down Yonge Street. Of course, at that time it was just a trail. And they got down as far as Montgomery's Tavern on Yonge Street, which is just north of St. Clair Avenue, and they stopped. They decided they'd spend the night at Montgomery's Tavern or just in the forest.
Was that all there in one day?
Yes, in one day. And then I think the rumor has it that they had a few drinks that first night.
Oh, I see.
Buoy up their spirit.
Yeah. But that would have been an excitement for a 19-year-old. I mean, this would be an experience.
Well, our older son, we have two sons who are 17 and 18, but our older son, who's Joel Blackbeaty, and one of my great-grandfather's brothers was Joel. So our son Joel is turning 19 next week. And great-grandfather would have just turned 19 when he went to this rebellion. So it's very easy for us to relate to what a 19-year-old was.
But what was your great-grandfather's name?
John Black.
John Black.
And he then became a justice of peace in York, in the county of York, as well as a farmer. It was always a farmer, and he did a lot of estate work. I have documents from him where he did legal work on estates as a justice of the peace, I guess. So the fact that I ended up being a lawyer in politics is pretty predictable. And 100 years before I became a councillor on King Township Council, he was a councillor on King Township Council.
Your great-grandfather?
Yes. In the 1880s, certainly 1888 and 86, I've been able to find those years. He was on King Township Council and was a deputy reeve.
So the Black family then has been on that, like, what do you say, 3 generations, 4 generations?
4 generations. And in fact, they were active in politics in Ontario. The Black family in King has been active in every single election in King at all 3 levels since 1837.
Really?
They
right
were
up
very
until the current one.
well, yes, they're very, very strong liberals. I've dropped my my party politics provincially, at least, with my present role as mayor. I think it's inappropriate, but up until this point, the Black family participated active in every single election for the Liberal Party.
Well, when your great-grandfather was around, there wasn't no Liberal. There was
But
Tory.
the Grits. And of course, I have a book in my library called Grits. And as a child, in grade 7 and 8 at Kettleby Public School out in King, I, for some reason, was interested in this, and I read every single book I could find on William Lyon Mackenzie King and on the Prime Minister, of course, who is the grandson of William Lyon Mackenzie King, Prime Minister Mackenzie, yes. Yeah. Well, Mackenzie King.
Yes.
Mackenzie who became Mackenzie King.
Yeah.
Mackenzie King, who was our longest-serving Prime Minister, I was just fascinated with his politics when I was a public school student out in King.
Because I grew up in Willowdale, which is where Mel Lastman Square is now, and it was a small sort of community at that time, North York, part of North York. And the Gibson House, which is just down the street from where we live, was also part of apparently the rebellion. And there was a house on the corner of, at that time, Park Home Avenue, where now the City Hall, or used to be the City Hall in North York, stands, which still had bullet holes in it. When I was a kid, we used to sit and watch it. Somehow or other it burnt down. And
now, Brian knows about that.
And the farm north of us, his name was James. I remember that because I worked there as a kid one time. There was an outbuilding there, and that had served at one time as the printing, the sort of secretive printing press for Mackenzie. We printed all these tracts and kind of things, and that burnt down too. So it's unfortunate, but there was some connection. That's how I got interested in listening, because it was when we went to high school. It was Jeffries, of course, the fellow who drew all the pictures for the history books, and it was North York marching on Toronto, which we always, as kids, got a great kick out of.
Well, that's interesting, but you see, I think what happened as the group marched down Yonge Street, they probably picked up additional people all the way down.
And the Red Lion Hotel, which was at the corner of Shepherd and
Well, sure. Well, I think they probably stopped at every hotel on the way down, just to rev up their energy level.
But the Gibson House is still there, and it's still sitting on the same, and it turned into a historical building, fortunately.
Yeah.
Well, there's an interesting story, and I haven't determined whether it was the Gibson House or not. Is that right on Yonge Street?
It sits back,
but it's close to Yonge. All right. When the rebels were finally defeated, and this took about several days, 3 or 4 days, because they were sort of marching back and forth between Montgomery's Tavern and the toll gate, which was at Bloor Street, and it was all forest area and so on. Finally, Governor Bond Head rallied some of his supporters, and they found a cannon, and they brought the cannon north from the waterfront up Yonge Street. Well, of course, these rebels from King Township and elsewhere weren't ready for cannon fire. And they got the cannon as far north as Montgomery's Tavern and blasting it off, and tremendous sounds, noise. One cannonball was lobbed right in the window of Montgomery's Tavern. Well, by this time, the rebels are hightailing it north, back up Yonge Street. And the story is that Jesse Lloyd stopped, and it may have been Gibson House, for a drink as he's leaving town.
I see.
And he's sitting there at the bar having a drink, and he notices something posted on there. It was a warrant for his life. Wanted dead or alive, Jesse Lloyd. And within 3 hours of Bond Head sort of, determining who the ringleaders were, he had a warrant identifying Mackenzie King, Jesse Lloyd, Samuel Lount, Matthews, and I've forgotten the other gentleman. Had the names. We have a copy of that warrant. And the money that was put on Jesse Lloyd's head was £500. And today's dollars, that was several $100,000.
Oh, yeah.
And that, as soon as Jesse read that, he decided he better get out of town, and he rode by horseback directly to his home in Lloydtown in the middle of the night, arriving about 3 a.m., quickly gathered his belongings together, said goodbye to his wife and his 9 children, and took off to the States.
And he became a fugitive then?
Yeah, became a fugitive, and in fact, he never returned. He died within a year and a half of that.
He did?
But they did capture 2 of his colleagues, and as Margaret said earlier, Lount was one of them. They were hung.
So he never came back?
Never came back, no.
Was he involved in that battle at Navy, what do you call it, Naval
Island? No, that was Mackenzie, William Lyon Mackenzie, sort of, he escaped to Navy Island.
Yeah.
And he orchestrated that activity. But Jesse, he ended up in Pennsylvania with relatives because he originally was a Quaker and went back with family members there, but just...
So he
was worn out.
As a broken man.
Yes, yeah, because in his 50s, that would be quite a mature life at that time. And
But his wife lived in hell in Lloydtown because the family compact would routinely raid her home and go through the entire home. They intercepted her letters. So Brian has copies of some letters where they are written in code from her and from Jesse Lloyd. They did communicate. In those days, mail was actually very good. It didn't take 7 days the way it does now.
No, I guess you're right, yeah.
No, it was very good. And they would just raid her house in the middle of the night, looking for clues, looking for Jesse Lloyd.
So what was the background, basically, the family compact thing? I've always had a trouble with
well, they were the wealthy English people who came over. The governor, of course, the governor generals that came.
This was the appointed council.
Yes.
And so the council was appointed, but they didn't have any rights, although there was an elected assembly,
right.
From what I understand. You can correct me, but from what I understand, elected, but if this Senate sort of thing or council thought that this legislation that they just passed was frivolous or didn't mean anything, they could just veto it. Was that the idea?
Yes, and it's one of the reasons that democracy is very important to me personally. And in King, we fight amalgamation and we stand up for the rights of the rural areas there, and we stand up for the rights of the farmers. That's probably why I'm mayor. I'm very loyal to the farmers' rights and to the rural people in general. But I think we're still fighting the cause, quite frankly. And at times, because we're a small population, we don't have any full representation, and yet we put forth how important the environment is and the rural way of life and various other things.
Okay, we just have to take a short break, Susie, and we'll be right back. Don't go away. So,
Still fighting.
Call us and tell us what you think of the show. Phone 895-4889. You can visit our website at rogerstelevision.com.
Right, so we're back. We just have a minute and a half to wrap up. The Black family then, was your great-grandfather then, he wasn't a refugee or a fugitive from justice. He just came back and stayed on the farm and became the Justice of the Peace.
One of the Justice of the Peace. He spent a few months in jail, and I think that's how he met my great-grandfather, who was a Quaker. And that's how the people in jail were fed.
Great-grandmother, you mean?
Your great-grandmother was a Quaker, and she came to Newmarket here to the meeting house all the time. But you're right, he wasn't a fugitive. He went back to the farm and became a Justice of the Peace and became a member of King Township Council and raised 7 or 8 children.
and then your grandfather, he was raised on the farm?
Yes, John Black. My grandfather was raised on the farm. He was born in 1856. And then my father, Howard Black, he was born in 1900. He was raised on the farm. And then I was raised on the farm.
So the farm business is still in the family?
No, we have 10 acres. My twin sister and I, just the two of us, we have 10 acres of the original 1843 deed. And it wasn't King Township when they got it. That part was in the county of Simcoe in West Bradford, West Glenmurray.
Really?
West Glenmurray. Well,
we have to go because I'd like to talk about this. Well, I know we can come back and we can continue the story, but I really appreciate you coming by and talking about this.
Well, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for inviting us. It was fun.
Thank you.
And the Lloyd family. Okay, that's it for now. I'm John Dowson. Bye for now.